One Piece end? This is the question all One Piece fans are dying to know. In 2022, Oda claimed he would end One Piece in 3 years. However, considering the rate of chapter releases has dwindled to barely 30 a year, and it's taken over 2 years just to complete Egghead Island, there's no feasible way to also complete Elbaf, Laugh Tale, and the gigantic Final War in the next 5 years. At the current pace, it's impossible to cover that much story in only 15 chapters a year. So when will One Piece actually end, and is there any way for us to figure it out? Yes, we can predict with a high degree of confidence that, at the pace it is going, One Piece will end in about 7.5 years, in the year 2032, likely around chapter 1350. This prediction is based on analyzing several factors. First, while Oda is unreliable with the number of years he claims for the ending, he is very reliable when it comes to sticking to certain chapter numbers for hitting each story milestone. Second, we have hit a newfound fairly consistent rate of chapter releases per year, which we can use to realistically plot time going forward. Third, there is a fairly consistent method to estimate the length of arcs post-time skip, which can be applied to the upcoming arcs. For instance, Oda's claims about 3 years or 5 years for the ending are unlikely to be taken seriously by even Oda himself. The way he plots the narrative of One Piece by chapter count tells a very different story. Since the time skip, we can observe the story of One Piece being split into very clear milestones by chapter count. Too many readers obsess over the exact numbers like something huge will happen exactly on chapter 900. The exact chapter number is not what it's really about. For any author writing such a huge story, it would be impossible to always stick to an exact chapter number for certain events. Oda tries to do cool bits of symbolism with his chapter numbers whenever possible, but that doesn't seem to be how he's plotting out the larger movements of the story. Instead, Oda uses certain chapter counts as rough milestones for when major sections of his story should end and begin, specifically in increments of 50 and 100. For example, at about chapter 600, the post-time skip begins. At about chapter 650, Fishman Island ends and Punk Hazard begins. At about chapter 700, Punk Hazard ends and Dressrosa begins. Dressrosa then runs for about 100 chapters from chapter 700 to 800. At about chapter 800, Zoo begins. From 800 to 900, Oda fits in the Zoo arc and the Whole Cake Island arc. At about chapter 900, Whole Cake Island ends and Wano begins. Wano then stretches about 150 chapters to chapter 1050. Specifically, Act 1 ends to take until about chapter 950, and Act 3 ends around 1050. It's clear that Oda completes certain sections of his story by rough increments of 50 and 100 chapters. This consistent pattern suggests that Oda has a clear pace for the story. Whenever plot lines seem rushed, it indicates Oda is trimming some of the current arc to hit the next chapter count milestone. Despite his inconsistent yearly predictions, Oda is not just freewheeling it. He has a clear plan for the story's end. Based on this pacing, we can estimate that around chapter 1200 will mark the end of Elbaf, likely the next arc after Egghead. Many readers might think that's too long for Elbaf, but if you consider in-between arc segments, it makes sense. Readers have consistently underestimated the length of post-time skip arcs. For example, most believed Whole Cake Island would be about 50 chapters, but it ended up being 80. Most thought Wano would be 100 to 120 chapters, but it turned out to be 150. Egghead was expected to be 20 chapters, then 40, but it has hit 60 chapters and is still ongoing. Readers underestimate arc lengths due to more elements in post-time skip arcs. Post-time skip arcs are generally longer as they incorporate more elements, like new settings, inhabitants, and running conflicts, plus additional elements from outside the island. This includes the revolutionaries, marines, Blackbeard pirates, grand fleets, and so on. Each arc layers multiple storylines due to ongoing macro story elements, estimating that Egghead and Elbaf together will take until about chapter 1200 seems reasonable. This leaves us with 2 major arcs on the horizon, Laugh Tale and the Final War. Unlike past arcs, we will no longer need as much time to develop new settings. Laugh Tale and the Final War will focus on macro storylines with established players. The Straw Hats, Blackbeard pirates, revolutionaries, Cross Guild, and Marines will finally resolve their storylines. Comparing the Final War to Wano, Wano took 150 chapters, but only about 60 were the final battle. The Final War will have a longer battle, but less setup time, as events building to it are happening in current arcs. It's like how Marineford didn't require 100 chapters of setup. The build-up to a world war happens organically over prior arcs. Laugh Tale won't have a bunch of new characters, meaning it could focus on established players, making it shorter, possibly just 50 chapters. The Final War could be written within 100 chapters. Assuming Laugh Tale and the Final War don't need to establish new settings and characters, a lower chapter count is feasible. If the Blackbeard conflict happens in the Final War and Laugh Tale has no conflict, Laugh Tale might be very short, like Zoo. This means the final battle would be longer, but the total chapter count remains the same. Overall, it's possible Oda could write both Laugh Tale and the Final War in 150 chapters, making the end around chapter 1350. There is a potential route where One Piece could end as early as chapter 1300, but that would require a bold move unlikely to happen. Finally, considering the rate of chapter releases has dwindled to barely over 30 a year and Oda taking more breaks, we can expect about 30 chapters per year. If we maintain this rate, One Piece could end in about 7.5 years. In 2032, we're in the home stretch, but there's still a ways to go. Let me know when you think One Piece will end in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe.